Okay, we are live now. Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to have you all joining us today with Robert Macfarlane and Jedediah Purdy, two favorites of mine. And I was just telling Jed before that I've been trying to get him to come to the bookstore for years now since we've taken over. So I'm excited to have him join us today, and I'm excited to have Rob, to have you back virtually. It's not the same as us meeting in the school gym as we did last June, but someday in the future, maybe again.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Of course, everybody in California and on the West Coast, Oregon, many of you who are tuning in today are obviously, we've all been impacted by the wildfires and just sort of what we've been living through over the past month. My wife said, we've woken up every morning thinking about wildfire since August 18th when the Woodward fire started in Point Reyes. And so to have blue skies and to have a conversation that promises to kind of help us process this collectively is really going to help. On top of everything else, there's this sense of a loss of a community as we're also still locked down, and so to have this occasion among the others that we're hosting in the coming weeks, it feels great to have you all here with us. So thank you. Please let us know where you're from in the chat. A couple of quick technical things on the bottom of your screen there. You'll see the Ask a Question function. Feel free at any point to type in a question there. It's a little easier for us to keep track of them there rather than in the chat. But also, like I said, feel free to chime in the chat. Part of the thing that I like about these virtual events is, as much as I would rather be in-person gathering, is that we kind of get to have a conversation alongside of our participants with Rob and Jed. So feel free to say something there. You'll see a link to buy Underland and a link to our site. I'll link as well in the chat. And just a couple of things, a couple of upcoming events that we have. I'll get these out of the way, and you can find these either on our Crowdcast channel where you registered for this, or on our website in a few occasions where we're partnering with other organizations. Next week, Tuesday, September 22nd, we have poet Dan Beachy Quick. He'll be joining us along with the Center for the Art of Translation. Dan learned ancient Greek. Luckily, this wasn't like a pandemic hobby that he picked up. He had learned this before. And he translated some poems from the ancient Greek that are not war poems, or not the sort of, poems that you think of when you think of ancient Greek poetry. Amazing poet, wrote one of the most perceptive and insightful books about Moby Dick that I've ever read. And so we hope you'll tune in then next Tuesday. Next Thursday night, September 24th, Carrie Arsenault and John Freeman join us to discuss Carrie's book, Milltown, which gets a good endorsement, looks like, from both of you. So yeah, Carrie's book is sort of a reckoning of, what industry, it's sort of the environmental and human impacts an industry has on a small town. And John, of course, is one of our great literary impresarios. He's just a champion and a keen editor and a great eye for talent, and has introduced us to a lot of writers over the years. Tuesday, October 6th, we're partnering with the Bay Area Book Festival to bring you Helen McDonald and Camille Dungy for an event. Helen and Camille will be discussing the new essay collection, Vesper Flights. And then last, among other events that we have going on, I'm excited that on the day, it's Thursday, October 15th, I'll be in conversation with Hugh Raffles, who will discuss his new book, The Book of Unconformities, which is just brilliant. It's a book that looks at geology and stones as sort of a way of jumping off and talking about, sort of disjunctions in life, and a wonderful book. So we hope you'll join us for that. Again, you can register on Crowdcast and check more info on our website. And with that, I'll just introduce Jed and Rob, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let you two get going. Jedediah Purdy is a member of the Columbia Law School faculty. He teaches and writes about environmental, property, and constitutional law, as well as legal and political theory. His most recent book, This Land Is Our Land, The Struggle for a New Commonwealth, which Jed is a staff pick at the store, by the way, explores how land has historically united and divided Americans, and it shows how environmental politics has always been closely connected with issues of distribution and justice, and describes humanity as an infrastructure species. And Robert Macfarlane, as many of you know, is the author of many prize-winning and best-selling books, including Mountains of the Mind, The Old Ways, Landmarks, and with Jackie Morris, The Lost Words, and the forthcoming Lost Spells next month, soon. Rob lives in Cambridge, England, where he's a fellow at the University of Cambridge. And with that, gentlemen, I'm going to leave it to you, and you will take over. Thank you again for joining us, both of you, and for everybody in the audience. And I'm really looking forward to this, to hearing you both today.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Jed.
Really nice to be here with you, and humbling to be here with this gathering, this far-flung gathering in which I think there's going to be a lot of commonality of mind and feeling, and maybe some instructive difference of mind and feeling as well. It's good to know that where those of you in California are, the skies are clearer and blue today. I'm in North Carolina at the moment, and the skies have also turned clear and begun to cool, and the breezes have begun to blow again after the long, hot, close summer here. And at the same time, wherever we are right now, we are all hemmed in by the crisis of the pandemic, which brings the air itself under suspicion and makes every person a potential danger to everyone else, and drives those of us who have the privilege of self-isolation into a greater remove from the physical day-to-day expression of our interdependence and community, which was already the bad habit of the age, and now it's reinforced by prudence, which is maybe the one virtue that this age has to excess. So under those circumstances, which I just wanted to name, it's a sort of a kind of heterotopia acknowledgement, a kind of acknowledgement of the not place where we are in this coming together. I'm going to take the chance to talk just a little bit about my experience of Underland's place within Rob Macfarlane's work, and then open up to a conversation with Rob and with all of you. I see the book as being, in some ways, a culmination of 2 decades of writing that have been driven by an appetite to understand the mind's encounter with nature. To take a couple of examples, the aim of Rob's great word hoard or lexicon, landmarks, was to recover words that are so particular that they tell you where you are, in what landscape, maybe at what time of day, in what stage of seasons, in the cycle of work and the place. A list, for example, of Gaelic words for peat that specify whether it's been cut, how dark, how heavy it is, the form in which it's been stacked, so that the names of the land change like a noun running through its declensions or a verb through its conjugations and moods. The old ways followed paths and sea routes around the British land and coasts, and stripped away all the overlays of maps and GPS that are almost naturalized to us or a kind of second nature, and brought home the experience of navigating instead by stories and pictures that are held in the mind, a way of making the land more articulate and making it a kind of record of the ways it's been inhabited and imagined and crossed over, by requiring the mind to attend to those as a condition of moving across it. And in Underland, we go where there aren't well-trodden ways, except maybe in the needs of the mind. We go underground where myth has gone so often, that where there are not many walkers. The places Rob takes us in the book include the catacombs of Paris, potassium and salt mines that branch for miles under the North Sea from their entrances in Yorkshire, the blue caverns that meltwater cuts into the glaciers of Greenland, an island off the coast of Norway where, if you can pass through the tide amid the storms and at just the right time of day, you can just glimpse a millennia-old painting of dancers and a human hand. So the Underland, as Rob reminds us in the book, is the home to Hades, to fairy kingdoms, and to many other realms of the spirits and the dead, from Mesopotamia and Ireland to the cosmologies of some Native American peoples, the Sami of Finland too. And it beckons, it has always beckoned with a kind of uncanniness. The places Rob goes with us underground are passages into deep time, passages into places that are older than history, often much older than humanity, but also new and uncharted, mysterious and ever-shifting. People who go there, and here we come to the needs of the mind, people who go there come back changed, if they come back at all. One possible change is to have the surface world, this familiar world, restored to you, to come back out of the dark laughing with joy and relief, feeling that, as Rob puts it in the book, green is a new color again. He has always been interested in his writing and how the world can be restored to us, made more vivid and intense, usually by memory and close attention. Here in Underland, the restoration comes from surprise, from the shock of coming back to life after dwelling for a little while with an intimation of some other state. Rob again. Warm air is rolling around me after my bones, as my bones grow again in the storm of light. The storm of light, phrase for moving across this surface of the everyday world. It resonates for me with Lucretius's great phrase for being alive, to be present on these shores of light. Here in the storm of light, Rob again, I sit laughing, knowing for those few moments that to understand light, you first have to have been buried in the deep down dark. But I'm going to assert, presumptuously, that in recent months, we all feel we've learned something about the deep down dark, or at least have had new kinds of encounters with it, but maybe not yet enough to understand light. Now, a sense of modesty is essential to Rob's work. From the beginning, everywhere you find him listening to others, following in their tracks, writing what he finds without claiming that it's his. It's always essential to his writing, though, at the same time, that it's in search of instruction. He has the gift, in his life as in his work, of a certain kind of generously hungry attention. Unlike so many people who work with words, he doesn't care what you're wrong about. He wants to know what you understand. He wants to know what he can learn from you. And we're all in search of instruction now about the relation between light and dark, about the relation between disorientation and clarity, about encounters that take us closer to death than we've been or wanted to be, and about what it means to be reminded of life again after that. We feel the need, all of us, to understand light, if you'll allow me to put it that way, echoing Rob's words. So that's some of the wish, the appetite, the hunger of the mind that I bring to thinking about Underland today. Rob, let me just cap that invitation, and everything else I say is going to be much, much briefer. I'm very grateful to all of you for listening to me unburden myself of a bit of my feeling about this book and Rob's work. A theme that's only named a few times, I think, in your writing, I can only think off the top of my head of one, but which I think pervades it, is the theme of disenchantment and reenchantment. How the world has been drained of some of the forms of meaning and mystery that once were more widely experienced as native to it. What's lost those for us, whether it's instrumental rationality, science, capitalism, something else, and the ways in which we might, you could say honorably and with a seriousness of mind, recover some of it. I think you describe landmarks somewhere early in the book as a reenchantment project. How are you thinking about the theme of reenchantment now, and how does Underland and how does your thinking today engage that wish?
Thank you. Well, first of all, Jed, a blessing to be here with you. I wish we were together. I should say to others in the room with us here tonight that I've been lucky to spend good time with Jed in forests and in seminar rooms, and to hear him speak of me is a blessing and a privilege. So thank you for the most generous introduction and profound introduction I could have wanted. Then to everyone this evening, how lovely to be with you. I do find this new intimacy a moving thing, a very moving thing. I have shivers down my spine in knowing that I'm sharing a kind of space with Jed Purdy, with Stephen, my friend from Point Reyes, with friends I made on the West Coast, with Lauret Savoy, who's here this evening, whose extraordinary book Trace was introduced to me by Stephen Sparks. All of you should read it. I've never met Lauret. I truly hope our paths cross in the field and in person one day. This is a wonderful thing that technology, a third nature, is permitting us this evening under these circumstances, and I'm profoundly grateful for it. Thank you all for coming. Then let me answer Jed's question and get us really going, if I can. I think when I wrote Landmarks, which described itself openly as a project of reenchantment, as a counter desecration phrase book. I took the phrase from Finlay MacLeod, my bilingual Gaelic English friend on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. There was still in me a latent belief in the political leverage of a romantic ecology, I think, if I might put it like that. It's not a belief that I've lost entirely, but I think Underland recognizes enchantment as, if we might put it like this, as the urge to recognize the world beyond us as not merely inert. I think I am confident in saying that capitalism, at its most rapacious, has taught us to regard nature in the broadest sense of that word as resource, as predominantly inert subject to be colonized, to be used, to be adapted to our own ends without any voice of its own. So if enchantment means the forced recognition of life, of liveliness, of reciprocity, of reactivity in the more than human world, then yes, I'm still all for that. But I think the difference in Underland is that it recognizes it recognizes the painful forms of reciprocity that we exist in with the more than human world. I wanted just to tell two stories very quickly. The book has been haunted by, or the book haunts events in the real world. It began in my mind in 2010 when, in 8 terrifying months, the Haitian earthquake occurred, the Deepwater Horizon blowout took place, the Chilean miners were trapped underground, and Eyjafjallajökull, the Icelandic volcano, erupted. All of those underworld events ruptured our surface. I finished the book in the first draft of the book in the months that the Thai football team were trapped under the mountain in their country. And just in the last 2 days, a huge section of the Greenland ice sheet has broken off. 110 square kilometers in northeast Greenland. I write a lot about Greenland and the ice loss in this book. This happened because the melt volume was drastically increasing from below the glacier. The void was rising to the surface, a 3-degree C warming since 1980 in that area of Greenland. This, it seems to me, is enchantment at work in a way. We are forced to recognize the reactivity of the more than human world to our actions. But another beautiful story, which broke only this evening, some of you may have seen it. Scientists, paleoarchaeologists in Spain have done fingerprinting work on the fingerprints left on the wall of a rock shelter by those who made art there between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago. And what they've discovered is that almost certainly it was made by a man and a woman, and it was made by more than one person. It was a collaborative, inclusive, social act. And this seemed a form of enchantment to me as well. A space made resonant with meaning that to me held a power of lesson for us, if I can put it like that. So enchantment cuts both ways. It's the forms of reciprocity that we must recognize in an ecological age with the more than human world. How's about that for a short answer, Jed? Come on, we'll go into quick fire mode soon, I promise everyone.
Here's that's how that is for a short answer is fantastic. But I want to push you a little on to continue thinking together about this question of reactivity. And let me put it this way. Even 15 years ago, and really for many decades before, a lot of the energy and sense of urgency around the idea of re-enchantment had to do with the thought that there was an excess of rationality in this modern world, and that in some sense the spirits had been driven out of it. And there are many things that can be said against the ways we've collectively made this world, but I'm not sure that an excess of rationality of the kind of hypertrophied modern type is it exactly now. And indeed, everyone has meanings they want to give the movements of the earth and of non-human things. Nationalist meanings, apocalyptic meanings. The land here in the US, as you know, is being politically figured as something that wants to be mined and drilled and burned to make humanity's project complete. And elsewhere, all over the language of soil and nation is on the march again. So how does a writer think about the responsibilities of enchantment at a time when it's vivid how many kinds of forces can be conjured with the language of nature's meaning, of the meaningfulness of nature's eventfulness and reactivity?
Yeah, it's a perilous terrain. It surely is. We are making animals. This is one of our talents and our curses. I think I say somewhere in the book that language has become one of the great geological forces of the Anthropocene, and I guess that is a version of this extension to that notion that you give, that discourse mobilizes into something like politically enabled myth. I love your point, your sense that we live in an age with a paucity of rationalism right now. We will always make meaning of nature. There are many attempts to render nature meaningless. They masquerade as sort of evacuated ontologies. In fact, they are almost always evacuations in the service of a greater power. We see this in the terra nullius characteristic of Australia, which permitted a settler colonialism and a genocidal practice. We see it in any developers glossy brochure where they will take waste ground and convert it into a site of worth, but for whom? So I'm always suspicious of claims that nature means nothing, because it is always being made to mean nothing by someone who wishes to make something of it for themselves. So really then we come down to the fights over the value of what nature must mean to us. In the context of Underland, I wanted to make a case for deep time, perhaps first. Deep time is John McPhee's phrase for the geological time, for those measures of Earth history and Earth future, crucially, which are made, as you know, Jed, as Lauret has written brilliantly about, in eons and epochs and not in hours and minutes. And I remember showing you an early draft of some of my reflections on deep time, and your pleasure at seeing me engage with a very ethical framing of the project. Deep time can seem annihilating to ethics. Well, what does it matter in the context of a 4.6 billion year old Earth, which will continue its cycles until the sun burns it out? But I make a case in the book, and for deep time as should be profoundly ethically activating. A sense of astonishment at the world that we live on, the gifts that we are given, and within an Anthropocene context, a sense of ourselves as profoundly legacy-leaving species. And I think it's that idea of deep time pivoting into the future and charging us with a responsibility for the legacies that we are now creating on a daily, monthly, yearly basis that will endure for hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of years. That seems to me a pinch point that we are poor at recognizing as polities, and especially now where we're trying to react so quickly, it seems even further away than ever before, I'm afraid. Is that your sense of things, Jed, that we're losing what little futurology we had in the face of the accelerations of crisis?
I think that's exactly right. I think it's beautifully put. I entirely agree. And I see the attention in Underland, and really in all the work that comes before it, to the kinds of enriching and baffling encounters that we can have with what is not exactly us, but with which we're continuous, as joined, almost hinged, maybe hinged by an organic joint rather than a mechanical joint, with the concept of deep time and the ethical work of deep time in the following way. As crisis accelerates and more is changed, and so in some sense irrevocably lost, the stakes of our ability to imagine the other than human as something real and alive, and even embodying something we might struggle to imagine because it's a struggle to imagine, as having a point of view, its own forms of value, its own measures of time. Whether we're talking about other species of the kind that walk around with us on legs, or the unsettlingly, wonderfully brain-like, neuron-like fungal structure of a forest subfloor, which you read about beautifully in the book. The more we can understand those forms of being that coexist with us, the more we know what's being destroyed, in as much as we are oblivious to it, incapable of conceiving of it as a cohabiting reality with us. Our obtuseness, if I can put it this way, almost ontological obtuseness, represents a kind of death sentence, because we can't even account for what is being swept away. So in that sense, looking forward in deep time seems to me to open this imperative field of ethical and political attention and action, and the deepening of the, like, if I can put it this way, phenomenology, the rendering of the experience of encounters that you do here and throughout the work, is a way of beginning to talk to ourselves about what else is moving into deep time with us, and what we might deny, and to which we might deny. I'm sorry, the grammar of the sentence is getting out of hand, so I'll stop there. I'll stop there. But the question is, who, if I may say who, goes into deep time? I'll paraphrase it this way and then stop. My friend Kate Aronoff, the wonderful climate journalist, says that the politics of climate change is the politics of who gets to live in the 21st century. In a sense, the politics of deep time is the politics of which forms of life and which kinds of being will continue into deep time and will constitute the world together with us. And I think you're, among other things, generating ways to make those forms intelligible to us. How's that for a short question that doesn't have a question mark at the end?
Well, let me say, not in as you untangled yourself from your own grammar, and I tried to do the same. I posted on Twitter last night because I received. I went and picked up some mail from work, which is something one does less frequently these days, and it included lots of wonderful letters from readers. I love hearing from readers. In it was a parcel with a book and a letter accompanying it. And the letter, as I posted on Twitter last night in a conversation that went wild in the way that grammar pedantry conversations tend to on Twitter, was from a man who was enraged by my use of prepositions in Underland. He felt that they violated all of his senses of what was honourable, conventional and right in the way one should use prepositions and thereby organise the given world.
I had been meaning to talk to you about this, Rob. I was looking for an appropriate time to raise it.
Well, he didn't object to the title, which, as we know, has a preposition pretty embedded within it. Overland, next land, above, below land. But the kicker in his letter was that he included this book, and he said, I'm giving you this book, but I don't want you to think it's a gift. You must keep it, and you must donate £5 to a charity of my choice for the pleasure of keeping it. So anyway, I donated £10 to a caving rescue organisation in Derbyshire and felt that my duty was discharged. Yes. So where were we, Jed? Before my diversion, we were.
Well, I expressed a thought about the relationship between the ethics of deep time and the ethics of what you might call deep description or deep imagination. It matters so much to find new ways of understanding what is alive with us, because it will either hurtle forward with us into deep time or be gone, and deep time will be impoverished by its absence. But I have a writerly question that I can connect.
Let me read briefly, Jed, because there is a sort of deep time, past, future moment here. We are living through the end of ice. I think we are beginning to see the end of ice. As a cryophile, that hurts me. Much is lost when ice goes. Forms of social life that are lively and rich upon this planet now, human with more than human assemblages, but also memory. I became fascinated by the idea that ice has a memory, and that memory is being lost through melt, as it were. But it's also a memory that we as humans try to retrieve, and then we use in a maneuver that is familiar from Underland stories going back as far as the Epic of Gilgamesh. We seek to use to tell the future. We delve deep down into what is ostensibly the past and then use it for prophecy. So here is a section from the Greenland chapters in praise of ice and thinking about ice's memory. Ice has a memory. It remembers in detail, and it remembers for 1,000,000 years or more. Ice remembers forest fires and rising seas. Ice remembers the chemical composition of the air around the start of the last ice age 110,000 years ago. It remembers how many days of sunshine fell upon it in a summer 50,000 years ago. It remembers the temperature in the clouds at a moment of snowfall early in the Holocene. It remembers the explosions of Tambora in 1815, Laki in 1783, Mount St. Helens in 1482, and Kauai in 1453. It remembers the smelting boom of the Romans. And it remembers the lethal quantities of lead that were present in petrol in the decades after the Second World War. It remembers, and it tells us that we live on a fickle planet capable of swift shifts and rapid reversals. Ice has a memory, and the color of this memory is blue. The blue of time is so beautiful that it pulls body and mind towards it. The blue of time is glimpsed in the depths of crevasses. The blue of time is glimpsed at the carving faces of glaciers where bergs of 100,000-year-old ice surge to the surface of fjords from far below the water level. Yes, ice is a recording medium and a storage medium. It collects and it keeps data for millennia. Unlike our hard disks and terabyte blocks, which are quickly updated or become outdated, ice has been consistent in its storage technology over millions of years. Once you know how to read its archive, it is legible almost as far down as the ice goes. Trapped air bubbles preserve details of atmospheric composition. The isotopic content of water molecules in the snow records temperature. Impurities in the snow, sulfuric acid, hydrogen peroxide, indicate past volcanic eruptions, pollution levels, biomass burning, the extent of sea ice. Hydrogen peroxide levels show how much sunlight fell upon that snow. And to imagine ice as a medium in this sense might also be to imagine it as a medium in the supernatural sense, a presence permitting communication with the dead and buried, across gulfs of deep time, through which one might hear distant messages about the future from the Pleistocene. So that's probably the best answer I can give to your question, Jed.
It's perfect. Thank you, Rob. I loved that passage, and I hadn't thought of it in months. But I remember now how it felt reading the manuscript to encounter the image of time as sometimes having a color, the blue of time. We have a question in our tab that I'd like to try on you. It's the one at the bottom from Dominic Lescue, I hope I'm not butchering it, who says, you describe mycorrhizal networks as a kind of enchanting collaboration or entanglement between trees and fungi. Each makes something for the other. Is it possible to call the relationship between human beings and trees a collaboration? I'm thinking in terms of humans making items out of more than humans, namely trees, books, tables, bed frames, etc. Is this collaboration or something else? Can we become more fungal, more enchanted in our translation of trees into other entities? Is there an ethics in the activity of this form of being from which we could take something in our material practice?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I'm very careful in that chapter to scrutinize the value giving that we undertake to the Wood Wide Web, which has been discovered by modern science, we might say, even though it has been intuited and registered by indigenous cultures for thousands of years before that point. And there has then been this race to, almost politically interpreted, either as a neoliberal enabler of greater competition between individual entities or as a mutual collaboration between individuals to form communities, much as such support networks sprung up inspiringly in the face of Corona in ways that stepped outside the usual confines of capitalist ordered structures and systems of apparent altruism and mutualism. But it's not either of those things, or rather we do not know what it is. So if it is a collaboration, I guess I use that as a shorthand for interaction, because it is so much more mysterious than our discoveries have yet made us able to know. The lovely question about whether we might make of wood respectfully takes me to the book I was reading last night with my 7-year-old, which is called The Treehouse Book. And the makers of these tree houses, which absolutely seize his imagination, as they do of so many children, the idea of having a home in a tree. He spent most of lockdown, when we were allowed out, in a tree in the local park. You know, dog shit bags around the bottom and bits of broken glass where the teenagers crept in at night. But that didn't matter. It was a kingdom to him. And I watched him try out all manner of political systems in there. He ran feudalism. He ran an autocracy with his chums. He ran a commune. They cycled through all the great human political experiments. At the beginning of this lovely book, it says, before we cut a tree to make a tree house of it, we check that we will not be reducing the forest. We check the tree for health. We ask the tree for its permission. The tree cannot respond, but at least there is an act of respect, and we thank the tree for what it will become. And I think that these are, this is maybe a cartoon version of this, but there is a care of work that's gone on there, and it seems to be something to do with the treehouse is the meeting point of fantasy, imagination, and craft. But of course, that can't necessarily be scaled up drastically to all forms of construction. But it's a fascinating question, and one I can't answer better. Oh, what happened to the talisman? Sorry, I've just spotted well, I can show you the bone owl, the whale bone owl that was cut that looks like a piece of Ice Age art, which I carried with me to help me see in the dark. Cut by Steve Dilworth, the 1 cut, 2 cuts, 3, 4, and then just these shaping strokes. A snowy owl as I see it, but others may see a barn owl or an eagle owl. The casket, I can't tell you, I'm afraid. That's there's only one other person who knows where the casket is, and they ain't telling.
Rob, something I like about the question from Dominic, and then after I post this, let's go to Michelle Underwood's question, which just popped up. So it asks for a translation of extraordinary journeys, of the lessons of extraordinary journeys, into a more ordinary kind of practice. The places you go are extraordinary places, many of them, not difficult to reach, many of them, esoteric places, many of them, and exceptional events even in your life. And so you're even in your rather extraordinary life. So in reading through Underland, I found myself wondering how I would apply to its lessons the famous upshot of Thoreau's thinking about wildness, that it's really a state of mind and a quality of vision more than it is pristine and perennial character of the world outside us. What kinds of, to sort of generalize Dominic's question, what kinds of practices, what concrete habits of attention let us carry the sense of living in a storm of light and moving through deep time as our bones grow until they fall, on the days and the seasons when we're not coming out of caves and we're not up against the blue of time? How do you keep the blue of time in your mind?
Yeah, I think we all know that one cannot live, as Muir suggested, one might perpetually in a storm of wonder. It's exhausting for one thing. I mean, you'd be absolutely knackered after an hour of it. And we also know that wonder is, in some ways, but not exclusively, a function of other forms of comfort and privilege that it enable these recognitions and these encounters. But I think I wrote somewhere that I see wonder as an essential survival skill of the Anthropocene, and as one of those sententious things that I think you've said, Jed, the Anthropocene, if we can say anything of it, turns grandiloquence up to volume 11 in Those Who Speak of It. I think you have some very good line like that. So perhaps this is a version of that. But I think I meant that in two senses, that one must remain astonished by the world beyond oneself in order to begin to fix scales of value for which one can fight. We might look to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge at the moment. We've seen what Trump is trying to do in the last months of what we must hope is his presidency. He's trying to rip open that coastal belt to 1.6 million acres of it to oil, gas, drilling at a time when the market is awash with crude, when there is no need for it to happen. But he wants to damage that place. But we have seen this amazing sort of cooperative of resistors come together from many directions. There's a brilliant interview on Yale E360. I posted it on Twitter last night with a Gwich'in elder called Sarah James, really inspiring piece of work about how she is standing government to government against Trump. But the governance, she roots back into language, song, and story. The governance, the convictions of value, of belief in the need to protect that place are born of forms of cultural encounter, as well as lived, worked, need-based encounter. But there are all sorts of other people coming together there as well, and they're fighting for what they believe to be right, which is also what I believe to be right. So all of that is a long way of saying that I see wonder as the first of all our passions, as Descartes put it, but not because it births science, but because it births passion. And I understand passion is an unruly emotion that fires in many different directions, but we will never fight for what we love without wonder. But I also see it as the thing that will get us through the horrors in which we are living is just a form of brief recreation, of brief escape. But Underland is also about looking into darkness. It's darkness not as a space of vision and creation, but darkness is that which underrides underwrites many of the spaces and the systems we've made. So it's a double looking down. And the book, it occults, as I put in one of the chapters, between wonder and horror, which feels the flickering vision that we inhabit now. And people on the West Coast waking up to blue skies after a week of orange and grey know that far more powerfully than I do right now.
How have you thought about isolation as a mode of experience and perhaps a kind of psychic darkness, a darkening of the lights of intersubjectivity, of sociality that we had learned to take for granted before we were thrown, many of us, before we were thrown into isolation by the pandemic? I ask, I guess, because to take the journeys you take in some of the chapters in Underland is to go into darkness literally and to encounter, I would say at the same time, all at once, both of the senses of meaning that you give to it. Darkness as frightening, claustrophobic, the place of those things we wished to put away or someone wished to put away or get away from, which come back to haunt us there. Also as a place of insight, wonder, restoration. And it is somehow your thought in the book, I think, that the encounter even with the really horrific, with the things that were buried because someone wanted to get rid of them, with the parts of our minds that we've buried because we wanted to get rid of them, that is part of what is instructive or restorative, or even, if I can put too strong a word on it, redemptive in the journey to the dark and the movement back to the light. And here we all are in this surface opacity, suddenly, this surface darkness, being thrown into the isolation, not of caves, but of our own places, being cut off from one another. Is the parallel that I'm intuiting alive to you? And have you been thinking about the sense in which we're all buried on the surface when we're locked down, what that's like?
Buried on the surface is such a way of putting it, Jed. And yes, of course, I wrote a book about claustrophobia, a 500-page book about claustrophobia and confinement and contemporary affect before the world suddenly found itself cinched within individual and national and regional curtilages that were pulled tighter and tighter, and many are still held within the tiniest of spaces. And so there was an uncanniness to returning to a book about that subject and beginning to speak about it again in a vastly changed context. I think I say somewhere in the book that claustrophobia is an affect of our time, that this sense of time and space narrowing, the tunnel walls closing in, space itself becoming a form of pressure that requires the building of a carapace to resist. These are powerful feelings. I search for them below the surface of the world and in stories from below the surface of the world, but then they came to find us all above ground. I might just read a short section which is about this admixture, this occulting of dark and light, of vision and constriction, which takes place in an early chapter about dark matter,
Yes.
which occurs in this salt mine at Bulby, potash mine in northeast Yorkshire, which you've already alluded to, Jed. And down there, scientists study dark matter underground because they want to be in, atomically speaking or subatomically speaking, the quietest place in the universe, and a mile of rock is a very good muffler to subatomic sound. So, but I became interested in the ways in which this dark matter laboratory, nested in a working salt mine, itself echoed other structures of search, faith, and annihilation in language and in task as well. So I'm talking to this extraordinary scientist down there, Christopher. We're about well over a kilometre underground in a slowly collapsing salt chamber, which doubles as his laboratory. I think of Revo Abbey, west of Bulby, where in a fertile river valley, Cistercian monks founded and built a space in which to hold mass. Out of ironstone, they made an airy structure of soaring buttresses and vaulting ceilings. Their abbey was one among a network of such sites spread around the world, in which prayers were offered to a presence disinclined to disclose itself to the usual beseechings. On the hillsides above Revo, geological forms known as slip rifts slowly open and close in the rock, emitting warm air from deep within the earth, such that on cold days the hillside itself appears to be breathing, as if the land itself were alive. Thousands of years before the Cistercians arrived in those valleys, before the dark matter scientists burrowed down into the salt mines, Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples entered the darkness of the slip rifts to carry out rituals that may well have been sacrificial and were surely devotional, interring body parts amid the stones of the rifts, another kind of annihilation product. The annihilation product is a very specific piece of term of art, as it were, from dark matter physics. And I'll just carry on just to read a little bit from this conversation with Christopher, because it's a passage that people have come back to in my conversations with him. And then perhaps we will turn to what questions remain from the audience. My sense, I say to Christopher, is that the search for dark matter has produced an elaborate, delicate edifice of presuppositions and a network of worship sites, which you know as laboratories, all dedicated to the search for an invisible universal entity which refuses to reveal itself. It seems to me to resemble what we call religion rather than what you call science. And then he surprises me with his answer. I grew up as a very serious Christian, he says. Then I lost my faith almost entirely when I found physics. Now that faith has returned, but in a much changed form. It's true that we dark matter researchers have less proof than other scientists in terms of what we seek to discover and what we believe we know. As to God, well, if there were a divinity, then it would be utterly separate from both scientific inquiry and human longing. He pauses again. It's not that this thinking is hard for him. He's moved down these paths before, but he's picking each word with care. No divinity in which I would wish to believe would declare itself by means of what we would recognize as evidence, he says, gesturing at the data readout. If there is a God, we should not be able to find it. If I detected proof of a deity, I would distrust that deity on the grounds that a God should be smarter than that. But does it change the way the world feels, I ask him, knowing that 100 trillion neutrinos pass through your body every second, that countless such particles perforate our brains and our hearts? Aren't you surprised that we don't fall through each surface of our world at every step or push through it with every touch? Christopher nods. He thinks. His screensaver changes to the limestone towers at Gwei Lin, seen near dusk such that they're backlit in ways that are considered widely appealing on Instagram and other large-scale image-sharing platforms. At the weekends, Christopher says, when I'm out for a walk with my wife, along the cliff tops near here on a sunny day, I know that our bodies are wide mesh nets, and that the cliffs we're walking on are nets too. And sometimes it seems, yes, as miraculous as if in our everyday world we suddenly found ourselves walking on water or on air. And I wonder what it must be like sometimes not to know this. He pauses, and it's clear that he's thinking now beyond the confines of the salt cavern, beyond even the known limits of the universe. But mostly, he continues, and in several ways, I'm amazed I'm able to hold the hand of the person I love. So, Christopher was a very wise man.
If I might, just for a moment, I have also been very moved by that passage, and it has also stayed in my mind. It made me think of the way that the Underland in mythic systems has so often embodied the sense that just behind the world we know, or beneath it, or alongside it, is another world, pulsing, alive, almost in parallel, with potential to break through. There's a tremendous kind of enrichment of consciousness, of the sense of possibility, of the sort of plenitude of the world, of its being miraculously crowded with being that comes from that intuition. And if you think of one of the traditional narratives of re-enchantment being that those are the spirits, the ways of imagination that are driven out of the world by a certain kind of reductive, empirical and imperial knowledge, Christopher seems to me to be describing a way that it has come back in. That everywhere you walk, you know that the world is more than you can apprehend. That what you can't quite know is also real and also there and moving through you. And there is this way which slightly to me continues to defy articulation, that just knowing that makes the parts of the world of which you already thought you were confident so much more surprising, so much richer in a certain way. It makes them a gift of a different kind. I think he's got that exactly right. The forest floor, maybe it has the same force when we walk through it and we think, I can't quite know the mind that's down there, but to think of it as a mind is to make even my hands and my child's little fat legs as we walk through this forest seem somehow even more miraculous, even if all that's happening is that I'm being reminded of their miraculous character. I'll tack one thing onto that. Rob generously mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that we've been in woods together. And I think I will regard it as one of the unearned privileges of my life for as long as I can recall things, that I was with Rob when he saw his first fireflies. A simple, plain insect that lights up. And we learn even with that kind of bioluminescence, we sort of learn living in the South to let the firefly fade into the background of our experience. But Rob was like this. I mean, he just, when we were running through the woods at dusk, and suddenly things were lighting up like little stars there among the trees. And there is a way in which that disposition generalized from the firefly to our sort of being at large is a part of the register of feeling and experience and relation to what's around us, that you're working to deepen and dignify and make more widely shared for those of us who find that it is a way of being that makes us better and more than we were. So it's the right vocation, Rob. That's all.
Let me give you some fireflies back, because they turn up in the Dark Matter chapter. They're there in a beautiful line, 2 lines from a poet now dead who was an extraordinary dark matter physicist herself. She died too young, Rebecca Elson. She talks about seeking dark matter, and she says, I write, dark matter physicists work at the boundary of the measurable and the imaginable. They seek the traces that dark matter leaves in the perceptible world. Theirs is hard philosophical work, requiring patience and something like faith, as if writes Rebecca Elson, all there were fireflies, and from them you could infer the meadow. Amazing, amazing. Yeah. And probably we should give the last of our words to her.
Yes.
You've been such a, from them you could infer the meadow. So so beautiful. I'm glad someone out there knows Rebecca's work.
Yes.
Wow. I've kept you all for a rich hour. I'm very happy to answer a question or two, but equally to let you fly yourselves.
Yes. What do you think, Stephen? Let's come back on.
I see. There's a couple more questions. It's up to you. I think we still have a lot of people here, and I'm enjoying listening. So if you want to answer a couple more, I would be grateful for that as well. I think as our audience.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, you go. I could answer. So Michelle Underwood has asked two questions. One of which we've been very philosophical and metaphysical. So maybe I will answer a very practical question of craft, as it were, or practice from Michelle, who asks about the methods. Do I rely solely on memory or keep records, written or drawn? I'm not on commission, but I really write a lot in field notebooks. They are my go-to little pocket books. Bash them up. They don't run out of battery. Their screen doesn't break. They're made of paper, and a pencil will write on them even a mile underground. So there's a lot of work just scribbling away, and then I fling the fragments down in the field. I fling the joining tendons down that night, and then when I get home, there's a lot of work of memory and movement that goes on. But those notebooks, those notebooks, of which I think people may have seen a few images over the years, but there's one from Greenland with some truly terrible sketching on the back of collapsing glaciers, and they also become they have little pockets in the back where bits of Greenlandic mica take up their own leaf-like position in among that. So lots of close writing in there, and some of it gets blurred. So the notebooks are crucial. Yeah, I'm a terrible drawer, terrible musician, terrible photographer. Basically, I have no talents apart from juggling words around until they kind of sound nice. So yeah, that's about it.
I mean, sure, we could keep going. I don't want to keep you. It's late where you are, Rob. We're here in the middle of the day, and
you've got blue skies to enjoy. That's you guys. I'm keeping you all indoors when you've got some blue skies for the first time in a week. You should get out there.
Well, one thing, I mentioned this earlier. I'd love to ask. So many from being in the bookstore, I know from having conversations about your work. That so many people ask, people build reading lists, based off of writers who you admire, writers you mentioned, and I wonder if there's anything that you've read in the last, little while that you're really keen on or, excited about.
So Jericho Brown's poetry, which I'm really, really enjoying the tradition. I'm looking forward to teaching that this year coming, this term coming. Jericho's work's amazing, and as some of you will have seen, it's just out. I haven't got it yet, but I've ordered it. Joy Harco has just edited a big new anthology of native voices, native poetry, which I think will stand as a really invaluable tome alongside Camille Dungy's Black Nature, which is I know Camille's going to be talking with Helen soon, but those two I think will take up long-term tenancy on my bookshelves. And then I'm writing a big essay for the New York Review of, medium-length essay for the New York Review of Books about wayfinding and about navigation at a time of disorientation. So I probably won't name the books I'm reviewing, but keep an eye out, because 2 out of the 3 are fantastic, and the 3rd ain't bad either. So that'll run probably in a month or a month or 2 in the New York Review of Books. Oh, the poet I just mentioned, sorry, Joy Harco has edited the collection of native writing, and Jericho Brown.
And Joy's anthology is called When the Light of the World Was Subdued, which just came out here. Amazing poet, poet laureate, United States poet laureate as well.
Have you got it in store, Stephen? Have you got the book yet? Because it's
we do, yes. It's available now. So
okay, well, I might be putting an order in via you then in that case. But yeah.
Well, I really want to thank both of you for this. It was as I sort of I want to let everyone know that Rob wrote a week or 10 days ago, seeing how things were going in California, and said, like, we can postpone, we can do whatever you need to do. I want to make sure that this isn't a distraction amid all that's going on. And I said, no, this will be the greatest way for me to spend an hour to hear both of you. And Jed, I mean, what insightful comments, and I mean, the sort of public understanding Rob's work, Underland, and also, where we are right now. And I think the sort of, as I said earlier, this sort of collectiveness and this community that we're building, it's virtual right now, but it means so much, and has helped me through my own sort of crisis of faith as a bookseller, in times like this, that it can feel, I think a lot of us feel like what we're doing is not enough, or and so to have these kind of conversations, it means the world, and something that we can carry on with us. So really, thank you both. Thank you everyone else for coming along, and I look forward to more of this in the future, and to hopefully see you both in person at some point, not too far down the line.
Yes. And thank you both so much.
Bless you all.
Yes.
Go well.
All right. Be well, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.